To all that join in time, welcome to this webinar. It's a bit of a case study of where people from co-learning supported the Governmental Institute for Pensions. So I will present to you Tom. Tom can wave a bit. So Tom is an internal coach at the organization, and then Thierry. So Thierry is one of the technical coaches within co-learning that supported this No More Majors initiative. And that's about it for the introduction. So lucky me, I don't have that much to say. Now it's Tom and all the others. I will mute myself and give the word to Tom. So thanks for this and break a leg.
All right. Thank you, Jurgen, for this brief but effective introduction. So I'm Tom. Like Jurgen said, I work here at the Federale PensioenDienst. I'm going to tell the story from my point of view, hoping to maybe give some ideas and inspire other internal change agents. Because, well, those internal change agents will know sometimes it's not very easy to get stuff done. So I hope this story can help you out a little bit. First of all, something about my organization. So the Belgian Federal Pension Service is a government agency that's responsible for citizens' legal pensions. So we gather data from citizens, employers, institutions, etc. And then we apply all the relevant social security and pension laws to inform the citizen and to finally pay them their actual pension. So we're not a very sexy startup. We're not at the forefront of technological innovation. However, we have a huge impact on people's lives. All Belgians are our customers. So we have 11 million customers. We pay about 40 billion euros per year. So that's where I get my kick out of. And I love that even my parents are my customers. So there's about 2,500 people working in the organization. And there's a central IT department that consists out of 250 people roughly. We're divided into 4 sub-departments. There are 2 development domains, so the attribution and payment domains. There's a transversal support sub-department, and there's an infrastructure and operations sub-department. So I've drawn it here in this organigram, the teams that are relevant to the story. So there's about 15 development teams, so about 150 people who work on the central in-house application called Theseos. This is the application that is used to handle most of the calculations and payments and data exchanges and workflows, etc. And it's been around for nearly 15 years, so it's quite an old application already. And so we have 15 teams working on it, so it feels quite big. So my story in the organization started about 3 years ago, so in 2016, as a result of a merger. So I was in this little organization on the left, and I was part of a team that worked on an old PLSQL and Oracle Forms application. And so back then I was trying really hard to get my team to to move away from waterfall and to embrace Kanban. And I remember thinking that there was a lot of work, and I mainly saw the things that we did wrong. But when I look back now, I can also see a few things that we actually did right, but that I didn't realize at the time. And so one of those things was that putting things into production actually was a non-event. So we would just develop stuff and test it in a staging environment. And then whenever it was ready, we would move it into production. This is something that could happen multiple times a week. In the middle of the day, we would just communicate to our users, and that was that. We didn't even need to use a source version control system because we didn't need one. The memory of our developers was sufficient. But then the bigger organization that we joined, that seemed a lot more advanced in their Agile stuff. So in my old organization, there were 3 teams, and we'd been struggling for 6 months to move them towards Agile. But in this new organization, there were more than a dozen Scrum teams with impressive sounding names and doing story points and retrospectives and all kinds of strange things that I really never heard of. And they were all working on this massive application called Theseos. And I remember it was quite overwhelming, and I didn't really understand much of it. And one of the things that puzzled me most was that like they did two weekly sprints with their dozen teams, but then they only went into production about 4 times a year. And these major releases, as they were called, they were quite a major deal. And you could, like, as the date came nearer, you could feel the stress rising, and there was a code freeze of a few weeks, and there were manual test sessions that lasted for days, where business people had to test the new functionality, making sure that there were no regressions and things like that. And then once the release had happened, it usually got even more stressful because there were always a bunch of hot fixes to do that needed to be rushed out the door. So I remember thinking, for all their fancy Scrum, they didn't seem to be that agile after all. But then as time went on, I got to understand Scrum a bit. I also came to the understanding that there's quite a difference between one application with one team of 10 people working on it and an application with 15 teams and 150 people working on it. So inside these 15 teams, I also, after a while, noticed plenty of people who didn't really like the major releases. And some of these people were even saying that, well, maybe we didn't need them anymore, because we also had a patch release process. These were minor releases that happened at the end of every sprint. And so some teams had already started moving, releasing all their functionality or as much as possible into this patch process. So there was a move towards doing everything in patches, but it was time to, we still had these major releases, and they were still a major deal. So finally, somewhere late 2017, a handful of these people got together in secret. Some of these people are actually on the chat, so hi guys, good job. So we realized that this was not something that would happen overnight, and we would need a lot of management support. Management was already sympathetic to the idea, but we knew we needed to make a clear case, so we decided to speak management language. We had to come up with numbers. So we made an estimate of how much effort one of these major releases took. And so this is a slide that we showed to management, because the result was surprising even to ourselves. So we spent, every major cost us about 334 man days. So that year we done 3 major releases. So we just spent 1,000 man days just to get the software out the door. So the business case for improving our releases was easily made. And management did agree, like, we should do something. But how would we pull this off, and where would we start? And we didn't know what to do, really. So by then, our IT department had been building an agile way of working for a few years, and we had stable cross-functional teams with a certain degree of autonomy. And then there was a wide range of frameworks being used inside these teams. So we had Scrum and Kanban and Scrumban and Scrumbot, and all to varying degrees of success. But at the team level, it seemed to be working. But came release time, it was obvious that we struggled to bring it all together, right? This balance between autonomy and coordination was very hard to get right for us. So around release time, with the extra stress, teams were arguing and they were not following procedures, or they got annoyed that the procedures keep changing and deadlines that keep moving, and nobody really knew what was going into production. So it was obvious that we needed a better way of scaling things up. So early 2018, in February, we invited Jurgen over for a large-scale Scrum course, which was very impactful. We also invited another trainer to talk about a less risky scaling framework. And what we got out of these trainings was, well, both of them actually emphasized the importance of good technical practices and the value of frequent releases. So these trainings really helped us to realize that, yes, we'd need to invest time and money into getting things right, but that, yes, this was an investment that would surely pay off. Another few months passed. We had a major release in June, the first one of 2018. And after every major release, we had a lessons learned session. And I remember preparing for this session, and I was kind of expecting, you know, the usual suggestions and complaints to come up. So just for me to get something of value out of it, I decided to be a good opportunity to experiment with energizers and icebreakers. And I have to say, I've never seen so much energy in a room when somebody brought up when somebody said, we don't really like major releases, can't we just get rid of them? And I remember really challenging everybody in the room, asking difficult questions, but the more I challenged them, the more energy I felt coming back. So yeah, we finished that session with a list of 4 things that we knew that made getting rid of major releases difficult. But we also left with the realization that, well, yeah, this is everybody feels this way. Maybe it's not even impossible. So hey, let's maybe just give it a go. And then later that summer, to my surprise, actually, I found out that Belgium's expert on CI was actually available, and he was willing to come spend some time with us, for which I'm still very grateful.
Thank you.
So yeah, it seems that all the stars had aligned and that this was going to happen. So now we just needed to make it a success. We didn't know really much, but we did know that we'd need like a group of people to spend a lot of time and effort on this. So I went looking for volunteers in the organization to form a No More Majors core group. And you can see the posters I made on the slides. So we plan to spend 1 day of workshops every week from September until the end of the year, because in December there was the next major release planned. And so we wanted to make the major release of December really the last one. We planned a 2-day kickoff session somewhere mid-December, and that's pretty much all we did for planning. All the rest we'd had to figure out as we went, because yeah, how hard can it be really?
And then they came to me with the request, can you help us achieve continuous delivery with a release cycle of 2 weeks by the end of December? And we were somewhere September, so that gave us a little 4 months to get there. So you can imagine my surprise, because I never seen an organization that big doing the move to continuous delivery that fast. And they just came to me to ask for help. So wow. All right. But well, continuous delivery isn't that easy. In fact, it's quite hard. It's a holistic approach to achieving the right speed and stability to your IT delivery process in order to satisfy business demand. And it's not just about speed, it's also about stability. And many people tend to forget that. So you need the speed to get fast feedback and to improve your stability, and you need the stability to improve your speed, because, well, with a stable delivery process, well, you will have less rework, and so well, it will improve your speed. So both are in balance. Now, to improve stability and speed, well, you need to apply lots of technological changes and lots of organizational changes. And you need to apply these changes to the unique circumstances and to the constraints of your organization. And that is what makes continuous delivery so difficult. And so here's a list of technological changes that are required to achieve continuous delivery. And Steve Smet put this list together while he was giving fruit to his kids. Well, I don't know how he managed to do that, but well, he's this crazy guy. And all of these changes are so difficult, and all of these changes are very valuable because they are all enablers of continuous delivery. And so let's pick one, like the database migrations. This was one of the problems that the agency mentioned to me. And well, on its own, it's not very difficult to implement. Once you pick the right tool, well, off you go. It's done. As long as you understand that database migrations is the sum of lots of incremental changes to the schema. But there was a bigger problem to this situation. It was that, well, DBAs weren't in the same team as the product teams. They were separate in a separate department with a separate line manager. And in addition, while product teams, well, may not maintain the DB scripts and may not execute the DB scripts. Only DBAs may do that. So, well, obviously, you get communication problems between the two teams. And so, well, obviously, from time to time, it happened that the script was not executed. Oops. And then you get a bug in production. Well, this problem on its own, we never really got it solved during those 4 months. It's only, well, later, somewhere in March, after that we got into continuous delivery, and when a crisis happened, that it actually got solved somehow. And then we have a whole list of organizational changes to adopt, which are much harder to apply and much more challenging and much more valuable than all the technology changes. And again, let's pick one, like Conway's law alignment that was already mentioned with the database migrations. Well, because the product teams and the DBAs weren't in the same in the same team, well, you weren't aligned with Conway's law, so you had communication overhead, and well, obviously it impacted stability, and well, because it impacted stability, it also impacted your speed. So your organization is this complex and adaptive system in which every individual only has a limited amount of information, and where every effect of an event can only be established in retrospect. So where do you start when you want to adopt continuous delivery? Well, which changes are you going to apply? Are you going for speed or are you going for stability? And well, in this situation, well, you need something that will help you to move forward in uncertain conditions. And this is where the improvement kata comes in. So the improvement kata is a continuous improvement framework that helps you executing and measuring organizational change. So this was described by Mike Rotter in his book, The Toyota Katas. And so it's a general purpose framework for reaching goals where the path to the goal is uncertain. And so it requires an iterative and incremental approach where you execute lots of experiments. And so the kata consists of 4 stages, and it starts by defining the direction you want to achieve. And this is derived from the vision of the organizational leadership. Once you have the direction, well, you then need to grasp your current situation. What is your situation? How does your process look like? And you need to collect lots of data around it and lots of metrics to create a baseline. And then, well, you will iteratively go towards this direction by going towards a target condition. And a target condition is something you want to achieve in the next improvement iteration. And an improvement iteration is somewhere between 1 week and 3 months. And so you will iteratively move towards this end direction. And this direction can be something that you don't achieve or that will take you years to achieve. Now, in this case, we achieved it in 4 months. Yeah. So now, during this first phase of defining this current condition and defining this next target condition, well, the team do not plan how they are going to achieve this target condition. It's only during the execution phase that they will then plan experiments to execute. And to execute those experiments, we use the PDCA cycle, the plan, do, check, act. You plan an experiment, you execute the experiment, you collect the data of this experiment, and then you check of the results while follow what you were expecting. And if the experiment was successful, well, you incorporate the change in your baseline. And if it wasn't as successful, you just discard it. So if we apply this to the organization, well, we get the following. So the direction was, well, we will have a last major release in December 2019. And after that, every release will happen every fortnight after the end of the sprint. Then, together with the core team, we grasped the current condition. And for that, we used value stream mapping of the technology value stream. So now a technology value stream is everything that happens from code commit until deployment into production. Now for the value stream mapping, well, we used sticky notes because sticky notes are far more fluid than drawings. So you can rearrange them as you wish, you can move them. And we did that collaboratively with everyone involved in the release process. And so what happens is when you do this in a group, well, it first starts messy, then it gets more messy, and then it gets really, really messy. But in the meantime, while people refine this value stream map and they build on the knowledge of each other, and on each iteration, well, you get the refinement of this value stream. And in the end, you integrate all the knowledge that is sitting in the heads of everyone together into one value stream map that represents the whole end-to-end release process. And so we got this. This was the major release process that took 6 months from code commit until production. And so during 5 months, well, an inventory of features is built up. And after 5 months, a code freeze happens of 3 weeks. And during the code freeze, well, lots of testing happens. And it's also where the whole awareness starts to grow about the importance of quality. And this is also the moment that the 330 man days started to be consumed. Then the process ends with a 1 week release, and then it finalizes with champagne, obviously, because you've spent just 6 months to get something into production. But we also had a second value stream that Jan and that Tom already mentioned, and this faster patch release that happened every fortnight, and that was used for fixes to features in production. But from time to time, it was also used to, well, also release some features, and it was used increasingly more to release features. And so when a transaction cost for releasing software is very, very high, well, obviously, a truncated value stream will often emerge for production fixes. And so you end up with a dual value stream. So you have a feature value stream with lead times of months, and you have a fixed value stream with lead times of weeks. Now, a dual value stream isn't as such bad because it also is an indicator of the potential of an organization to achieve continuous delivery. And so, well, they had this potential because we had this batch release. And so from then on, I only concentrated on this batch release cycle and never really paid attention to the major release process. Although from time to time people tried to get me back to this major release process, but I really didn't want to. Now at the same time, while Steve Smet was finishing his book and I was finishing reviewing it, and in his book, while measuring continuous delivery, well, he describes how you can use indicators to measure the adoption of continuous delivery by collecting metrics over time about the throughput and the stability of your continuous delivery pipeline. And so the idea is to see trends. How good or how bad are you in adopting continuous delivery? And he also used the theory of constraints and applied it to the continuous delivery pipeline to find the bottlenecks in the delivery process. And also, well, more interestingly, to find the experiments that were most likely to succeed. Now, the central premise to theory of constraints is that, well, the goal of any organization is to make money by increasing throughput while simultaneously reducing your inventory and reducing your operational expenses. And the amount of money that an organization can create is limited by a bottleneck somewhere in its system. So every system has a bottleneck, and improving anything else than the bottleneck is just an illusion. So if you have a system that consists of step A, B, and C, and if B is your bottleneck, well, if you try to improve A, well, it won't add any value to the throughput, because the only thing you will create is more inventory in front of your bottleneck B. And optimizing C will not have any value because, well, it will only result in more work starvation for C. So I asked the core team to use sticky notes and use the green sticky notes to estimate the duration of every step in this value stream of the patch release process. So it's not really important to have exact measures, it's just to have an idea. And I also asked them to have an estimation of the failure rate of every step. And so, well, the purpose was here, well, to find the bottleneck in the process. Now note that every lane, so how does it come? We only see part of the value stream. Well, never mind. Every lane, well, represents a branch, a version control branch. Now, interestingly, it wasn't the manual testing and the manual regression testing that took most of the time, although they were taking from 1 hour to a day to execute. But the real bottleneck was the execution of the automated tests, although they only took, well, somewhere between 1 hour and 4 hours to execute. But the failure rate was very high, and so they had to be re-executed many times before coming to a success. And so we started concentrating on this, improving the execution of the automated test. And so I suggested as a first experiment to create a continuous delivery pipeline. And my idea was that, well, I want them to execute all the tests that exist in a sequence and to visualize also, well, the execution of all those tests, because up until now, well, all tests were executed on an ad hoc basis, and nobody had a view on the total number of tests that existed and on the stability of those tests. So I asked them to set up a pipeline. Now, it wasn't a full continuous delivery pipeline because, well, it didn't deploy it into production, but it already went until the production of a potential release candidate. And I also asked them to start collecting metrics about this pipeline, like, well, collecting the lead time and collecting the failure rate, so that we could start plotting indicators about how good or how bad we were doing. And so the result was that we had a lead time of 8 hours and a failure rate of 70%. Now, the reasons for this high failure rate was that, well, automated tests were executed on the same environment where manual testing happened. And so obviously the data that was present, well, changed over time. The test data wasn't necessarily cleaned up in the database, and kind of risk-based testing was applied. We only executed the tests that we thought were impacted by the changes that were done in the production code. Now, I can see the value of risk-based testing as an optimization of your delivery process, but I wouldn't only do that once you have a very stable release process. There was also the idea of having one test fails the release candidate wasn't really known in the organization. It's a thing I spent a lot of time explaining, that, well, it doesn't matter if it is 100 tests or one test that is failing, well, your release candidate is just not good enough to go into production. And then there were lots of dependencies on third-party services that once were there, once were not there while executing the test. And lastly, well, we had also a desynchronization between tests and production code, because the tests were sitting in a different Git repository than the production code, for the simple reason that the tests were that big, or something like 16 gigabytes, that they just didn't fit anymore in the production Git repo. So this brought us to this current condition. We have a value stream map with a 70% failure rate and a lead time of 8 hours. And so together, we defined the next target condition. And the team, well, decided that, well, the next target condition would be, well, a success rate of 60%. Meaning, and because the lead time was 8 hours, we could only execute the pipeline once per day at night. So that meant that only 3 out of 5 nightly builds would be successful. So that was the next target condition. And we wanted to achieve this in a month's time. And we were going to execute some experiments to get there. And we would start with daily evaluations of the failing tests within the team, and fix failing tests as soon as they were noticed. We would recreate the database before running the automated tests. We would have a separate environment for automated tests, separate from the manual testing. We would try to stop the third-party services, and we would start collecting metrics about the continuous delivery pipeline automatically. Now, obviously, well, it didn't work as I was expecting. So this was the plan I had in my head, but it went slightly different. Now, when I started at working with this agency, well, this was September. Well, the next major release cycle was already started since June. So during 2 months, functionality had been created and had been built up. Now, I hoped naively that we could find a way to incrementally move all the functionality that has already been developed from this major release cycle towards the new patch release cycle, so the fortnightly releases. Unfortunately, this wasn't possible because the organization adopted a rather complex branching strategy that made it quite impossible to do so. So I'm not going to explain the branching strategy, just explain that, well, major developments were somehow sitting on the develop branch. So all functionality that was going to be released in the next major release was sitting on develop, and all functionality that wanted to be released in the current patch release cycle was cherry-picked on the patch branch that then got merged into a master branch and then got released into production. So after 6 months, the develop branch and this master branch just diverged too much from each other that it was impossible to merge them together. And so after every major release, well, what they did was just delete the existing master branch and recreate a new one from the existing develop branch. And so, well, it was rather impossible to incrementally move features waiting to be released in this major release towards this patch release process. And so with a big sigh, we decided to just let go on this major release that would happen in December and just let it happen in December and just make sure that from then on, every new release would happen fortnightly. And so, well, and make sure that everything was prepared, that this first fortnightly release would go well in January. I also suggested that once fortnightly releases would start, well, we would adopt first the Git flow branching strategy. Although I'm really not a fan of Git flow and I'm really not a fan of branching. In the situation of the agency, this was the best solution. Well, they were using something that was Git flowish, so it wasn't a big change. But my idea was that this would be a temporary situation, somewhere 6 months, and that after 6 months, they could move towards GitHub flow, which is a far more simpler branching strategy. And then eventually, when they feel very confident after, well, let's say a year or 2 years, go towards string-based development. Now, well, it will take some more time. There was also the fear of missing key steps. So in the major release process, there were lots of rituals present that weren't present in the faster patch release cycle. And so people weren't at ease if those rituals weren't present, like the 3-week code freeze that existed, an all-team go-no-go decision meeting, a pre-production exercise, automated smoke tests after the release in production. So, well, to mitigate this fear, well, we just found ways to reduce the execution of those rituals and just introduce them into the 2 weeks release cycle. And so, well, we went from a 3-week code freeze to a 2-day code freeze, allowing business to do all the testing that happened, also by also inviting business earlier in the development process to already perform tests, even before getting in this 2 days code freeze. The go-no-go decision meeting was kept, but it was just a simple thing, well, just a checkbox every team could take, like, well, for us it's okay. The pre-production exercise has been automated, and automated smoke tests were added to the release process in the patch releases. But meanwhile, well, the improvement to the tests, well, didn't really happen. We went from a lead time of 8 hours to a lead time of 4 hours. This was good. So it allowed us to execute the test not once a day, but we could execute them twice a day, even 3 times a day, which increased the feedback, but the tests were constantly failing. It's only somewhere in end of November that we had the first green pipeline where all tests passed. And then afterwards we had again 2 weeks where the pipeline was red.
So, as you can see, it was November by now, and we decided what this new release procedure would look like, and the technical preparations in Jenkins and Excel release were well underway, thanks in big part to our transversal built-in release team. But so by now, the major release of December was starting to come close. And so we knew that this new branching strategy would have to come into effect about a month and a half from now. And then the new release procedure would really kick in only a few weeks after that. And so all 15 teams that worked on Theseos would have to play ball, since in our new branching strategy, any problem could block the entire pipeline. So it was time to get everybody involved, and it was time to go public, to go very public. And so the 12th of November was the perfect date. We had our monthly all hands IT meeting called One ICT, which was a perfect real life platform to announce and explain these changes to all of the teams. And then right after that, there was an info session planned for the next major release, so the major release of December. And in this info session, all the people from business would be informed about what they would have to manually test for the major release. Now, these people would obviously be hugely impacted by the new release process too, so it was very important to get them on board and to inform them as well. Now, during our workshops and during the preparation, we'd always invited people for a brief show and tell session after every workshop, and we'd been communicating about our plans whenever we could. So most of the people in the organization knew about the No More Majors initiative, but this was the first time where it got really concrete. So that week, we worked on a presentation explaining in detail these new procedures, and we used pretty red and green traffic lights, because we knew we needed a clear and a practical proposal, something that people could definitely say yes or no to, as simple as that. Now, the first such people to say yes or no were obviously our own management. So I sent them the first draft of the presentation. I think it was the Friday before. And it seemed that that presentation made it very clear and practical to them what was actually going to happen. So that plan had worked. Now, they could either say yes or no. And well, it seemed at first they weren't saying yes. So this was the Friday before this big announcement on Monday, so it was kind of a problem. And I think like one of the signs of a good team is that when they are under pressure, they come together and they don't tear apart. And that's exactly what happened that Friday. So the No More Majors core team got together and discussed the feedback that we'd heard and the objections that we saw. And some of these objections were just a result of miscommunication or fear of change. But some of these objections were quite valid because, yeah, as Thierry mentioned, the tests were not very stable, and suddenly any blockage could block the whole pipeline and the release. So we'd have to do some mitigations. So we decided to make 2 modifications to our plan. So we were going to split the existing test suites into 2 groups. So there was a first group, the stable tests. These were reliable, and so their output could be trusted. So these would block the pipeline and the release if they were red. But then a second run, the quarantine tests, They would still be run because their feedback would somehow still be of value. But even if they turned red, we would still go ahead. And the second modification we made was to install a manual overrule, where in extreme cases, it would be possible to go into production on a red build anyway. So yeah, obviously those two modifications opened a few backdoors that we didn't really love, but maybe this would be enough to get a yes from management and the other stakeholders. So I remember that Friday evening I was frantically typing away and modifying the presentation. So a few of my colleagues that were still online too, and we discussed a little bit. It was quite late by the time we finished. But it was obvious that I wasn't the only one who thought that this was important and quite exciting. So I sent off the second version to management, saying, look, this is what we'll present on Monday, and please send us your feedback. So I was like, yeah, this could be a very busy weekend. But to my surprise, it stayed quiet on the other end. So Monday morning came along. We did the presentations and they went well. We had a few questions, which we were able to answer, some good feedback, but it seemed that everybody was aligned. So yeah, that made it clear that, wait, this is actually going to happen. So from then on, mid-November, we really had no excuses anymore. Just time to get going. We had one more month. But of course, we still had the major release of December, which obviously took up a lot of our energy. The major release went well, which I thought could maybe not be good news for us. Turned out okay, because apart from doing the major release, we managed to finalize our modification. So everything was ready to switch to the new branching strategy. So this first new release was planned for the third week of January. So yeah, by then all we could do is hold our breath and hope that everything would go okay, but we were expecting a storm of problems. So the release date came along and it went quite smoothly. There were a few little hiccups, but nothing major, and it really felt like a normal patch release, like what we were used to. Even though underlying the process and all that had changed dramatically. But so it seemed that our big bang and all the work that came along with it had paid off.
And so the first time I came back after this first release, I saw smiles everywhere. Everybody was excited. Nobody had imagined that such change would ever be possible inside that organization. And they just did it. And I remember there was one team member who always looked very sad during the run-up of the new process, and she was convinced the changes were needed. She was very supportive, but feared that they would never happen. And then on my first visit, well, after the first fortnightly release, well, her usual long face was replaced by a smile from ear to ear, and there was so much energy that the core team just started a new improvement kata, which they wanted to achieve strength-based development. But well, this is not a story that we won't tell here. Now, what I learned from this exercise that it is actually possible to achieve continuous delivery without first reaching continuous integration, which I'm a bit sad about, because I've always believed you had first to go through continuous integration. Now, continuous integration has a very static threshold. And this means you commit at least once a day, and your pipeline is always green, and whenever it gets red, it gets fixed within 10 minutes. Now, is it good that you can achieve continuous delivery without continuous integration? Well, obviously, I wouldn't advise this. In my opinion, it worked because there were a lot of passionate leprechauns that made it work, and that made sure it could be released. But there is a big risk these people get into burnout because of this. I also learned that it's actually possible to achieve your vision of your improvement kata without ever reaching your first improvement kata, which is also rather painful to realize. Somewhere we have done something wrong, I think, but whatever. But are fortnightly releases considered to be continuous delivery? Well, continuous delivery has a dynamic success threshold, so it depends on your business needs. So we say that an organization is in a state of continuous delivery when its IT services have the stability and throughput required to satisfy market demand. Now, unfortunately, in this case, business wasn't involved in this decision. And in fact, business wasn't really happy with the idea of releasing every 2 weeks. It was really an IT decision. Now, I think it's a good decision because they reduced a lot their risks. Well, problem that business has is that they risk to have some testing fatigue. But probably this will work out over time.
Yeah, so as Thierry said, it's September now, so we've been doing continuous delivery for about 9 months. And the changes that we've seen in the organization, I think, are quite remarkable. So you can see in the new organogram that officially nothing has changed, but that says more about organograms than about our organization. Because I can assure you that, like, on the inside, it feels quite different. Like, it's taken a few months to really take hold, because yeah, change happens slowly. But simply the effects of making the current status of the build very simple to interpret, red or green, has caused us to, right now we have so many conversations about quality and testing and how to improve stability, which 12 months ago just did not happen. So we know that we have to work on it, and we are working on it now. It's clear and visible to everybody. But also, and maybe even more importantly, the effect of drastically shortening the feedback loop is even more impressive. So I said earlier that the first release went well, and yeah, it did. But the second release and the third release, they both had to be postponed or hot fixed. So they were only postponed by a few days. So in the big picture, it's really no big deal. But it did make some of our problems painfully visible to everybody. So everybody on the inside, but from now on also our business, our customers, and our management. So Jerry already mentioned the example about we have an external DBA team that makes all the modifications in the database. And everybody on the inside realizes that this is really a constant source of errors and delays. And this is something that everybody complains about for years, but nothing ever changes. So yeah, what can you do? But so on the third release, there was a problem with these DB scripts not being executed correctly, which caused the delay. And then suddenly we get an angry email from management demanding that we'd come up with an improvement on how to better align the database with the code. So after just a few weeks of doing CD, suddenly we had the mandate to fix a problem that had been bothering us for years. Also, I see in the development teams, it's opened up a can of like professional pride and passion for doing things right. And I think it's maybe the first time that we set an ambitious goal and we actually managed to do it. So it makes us feel hungry for more. So looking back at the whole initiative, we think it worked. We think it worked because of several reasons. Obviously, we got lucky, is a big part. But we paid a lot of attention to like open and proactive communication. So public announcements about the start of the initiative, in the posters I showed earlier. We did occasional presentations at the One ICT to management, to business. We had these show and tell sessions after every session. We even did a No More Majors on tour where we went to see all the development teams to help them and answer their questions. So yeah, we spent a lot of time on proactive communication. And we learned that it's very important to really speak the language of the stakeholders. So when you explain things to the development teams, you speak their language. When you explain things to management, obviously you speak their language, in this case numbers or pretty colors. And to your customers, yeah, you emphasize different things. So this communication that is proactive and that is targeted was helped us to achieve it.
And while the core team were great people, Tom sent an invitation to everyone in the IT organization to participate, and so everyone motivated with enough knowledge of the system was welcome, and everyone was welcome to provide feedback. We also had everyone involved in the release process was around the table. So we had the software engineers, we had the test engineers, we had analysts, build and release engineers, architects were there. Well, only DBAs were missing and infrastructure, unfortunately. And the group also started off with lots of energy. Well, Tom spent a lot of time with energizers, and this worked very well to get a yelled team of people that really wanted to achieve something. And in fact, we started with too many volunteers in the beginning. I remember that at the kickoff, we started with 20 people around the table.
So yeah, Thierry mentioned it at the beginning. We did spend time like actually building this team. We spent time aligning expectations and making clear what the purpose was, what everybody thought they would get out of it. We spent time trying to create a safe environment where it was okay to disagree. And yeah, we spent effort making sure that the sessions themselves were well facilitated, because yeah, people were there on a voluntary basis, so we had to make sure that they wanted to come back.
And there was a very short deadline, obviously. 4 months is, well, less than 4 months. So there was a sense of urgency. So ça passe ou ça passe. And we used also the inertia at our advantage. We acted and decided faster than the opposition. So when management got interested in the no more major, well, everything was already in place. And Tom did the presentation of the no more major project to the board when the first 2 weekly release was already done. So yeah, they didn't really have a choice.
Yeah, and that made it very easy to explain to them that the risk of this project was very limited. And something that I noticed, and I want to tie that back to what I said at the beginning, having an external coach come in who's been there before, who has seen lots of different environments, who understands the difficulty, who manages to explain everything clearly, even though his handwriting is awful. But also having somebody come in to work with you really serves as a rally point. Like every Monday, Thierry was there, so he'll show up for the whole day of workshops. And so Thierry mentioned Conway's law earlier. As an internal change agent, I'd like to introduce Jesus's law, because it's true that, yeah, as an internal change agent, I've noticed that a very good way to get the organization to move is to invite somebody from the outside in, because they have a lot more weight than somebody on the inside. So as an internal change agent, it's very important to get like a bit of a network, find people that say the things that you think are applicable and important for your organization, and just go find them. It's their job, so they love to do this anyway, right? Voila. And
right.
That's about what we have prepared for you. I hope you found it interesting. I guess we have time for questions.
We have time for questions.
Maybe we even have time for answers. How does this work? If you have a question, do you type it in the chat, or do people come?
So if people have a question, just unmute yourself to pose the question and mute yourself again. If too many people speak at once, I will try to moderate in that sense and point out who to speak. People that are not having audio available, they can type a message in the chat box, and then I will announce the question for Tom and Thierry.
Excellent. Excellent. So yeah, anybody? Yeah. I see somebody's mouth moving, but I hear no sound. Yes.
Me?
Now I can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. What is our next goal?
What is our next goal?
Yeah.
Yeah, very good question. Thierry mentioned, so we've achieved CD, but for us as an organization, continuous integration is actually more important than continuous delivery, because we see this pipeline mostly as like a scaling mechanism, right? Where if we know that what we're building on is always stable, then yeah, it helps to scale up things. Like we have 15 teams committing to the same code base. If we know that it's always ready for production, then yeah, we lose a lot less time fixing stuff. So what is your
time frame for that?
We're starting to set that up. For no more majors, there was a clear and easily defined goal. For how to get to CI, I think it's more difficult. And there's less sense of urgency.
Yeah. Why?
Because everybody hated major releases. And we knew, okay, December there's another major release, and that really will be the last one. So if we don't want to plan a new major release somewhere in March the year after, then we have to do this now. CI is more.
Yeah, you still have a lot of manual testing, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah,
and we have very unstable tests.
Yeah, and isn't that something that people are really getting, as you mentioned earlier, burned out about?
Well, it's what we're used to. We don't know any better.
Well,
unfortunately. So yes, I personally have ambitions. I'm very glad we got rid of major releases, and I'm looking forward to getting closer to continuous integration. When and how that will happen is a work in progress.
Any more questions?
Yes, one more question. Was there also some other kind of change in organization or team or way of working besides everything you mentioned?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of things that we don't have time to mention, of course. Somewhere, I think halfway November or so, when we noticed that our test repo was so huge that it couldn't fit into the same repo as our code, we set up or we asked people to form a QA core group. And they, like the No More Majors community, gets together and works on stuff. They also got together and worked on stuff. So they managed to reduce the size of these tests from 16 gigabytes to
2 gigabytes.
To 2 gigabytes in about 3 months.
In 3 months' time, really impressive.
Yeah. So now we have the tests and the code in the same repo, which makes it a lot easier to synchronize.
So the reason that that test repo was so big was because the test data was so huge. People didn't really question the test data. They just did a dump of production data and used that in their tests instead of building up the right test data for every test case, and even better, creating the test data on the fly when the tests are created. So they did a huge effort in reducing this test data, also in starting to create the dossiers that are used for executing the tests on the fly, and that helped to get to this. test size. And now by reducing this size of the test, well, we also saw an improvement in the stability of the test, because, well, there were lots of timeouts also in the test execution, because, well, the data was so big to send to the server that the server at a certain point said, well, yeah.
Yeah.
So that didn't happen anymore.
Yeah. And so we talk a lot about the test pyramid now, where we have a lot of end-to-end tests, and we realize now that having more unit tests will really help our pipeline to make it more stable and faster as well, and easier to maintain. So those kinds of things are happening as well.
So something that they didn't mention that much is after the course in February, I think somewhere in April or May, the decision came to go for a large-scale Scrum and less, where this no more major was part of being a prerequisite. Because if you have 16 teams, you don't turn around 16 teams at once. So once they did this one first major release there in January, that's the moment when they also turned around, I guess, 6 teams into one less area within this 16 team part. Unfortunately, lots of those people inside this less bubble, as we want to call it, they were so busy with the less bubble that they didn't spend enough time on the no more majors, which is also not fun.
Yes, but that's going to change now.
Yeah, this is improving.
Yes.
less hot fixes.
Yeah. So the people that were in this last split, for example, the 6 teams there, they spent lots of time on the different way of working and collaborating across teams and having a different product owner with higher transparency and visibility on what has to come, how to do refinement from within the teams directly with business users in that sense. So they had lots of effort to be spent on that one.
Yeah.
At this moment in time, they getting used to this new way of working and refining with business and showing business and all the rest, that the no more majors and actually the CI in that sense as well becomes more of their attention point. So, but this took, let's say 8 to 9 months to get there from.
And in the last bubble, they did the organization changes first, and now they're ready for the technical changes. No more majors was the technical changes first, and the organizational changes, even though officially they're not there, but they're obviously they are there. So these organizational changes flow from the technical changes.
Any more questions?
Yeah. I'm wondering about your like every other week releases. Is there any documentation required? Like different type of documentation. I'm talking about customer documentation maybe that you need to give out to someone on how to use it, or any regulatives that require you to produce evidence documentation, which is also something.
I'm having trouble hearing you. The line is not great, I think.
No, that's okay.
So
I can type my answer or my question in chat. Okay.
Yeah, that's maybe easier.
And while she's typing, you see Tom and Thierry, you got the congrats from Cedric, who apparently saw the first steps.
Yeah, he was one of those people that got together in secret to estimate the 334 man days. He left us since, so I'm glad he got to see the end result of our work.
Cool.
Because he played a big role in it too. So thanks, Cedric.
I wanted to be discreet. Thank you.
Yeah, I tried to be discreet at the beginning of the presentation too, but I noticed that the chat is to everyone, not private.
So do you need documentation when you release?
You
You never mentioned that to me, so this is a thing that never got mentioned.
Well, we have release notes.
Oh yeah.
That hasn't changed really. So there was a big pile of release notes for a major release. Now we have a small pile for every 2 weekly release.
Isn't that automated? Isn't that from your Jira that you extract that?
Yeah. I can help out maybe in this, because this was one of the things when, for the last bubble, for example, we pretty much ditched Jira, but people are creating a Jira ticket the moment they plan for an item, because the release documentation is extracted from Jira.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So this is the minimum documentation is still put in Jira.
Yeah, I see. Indeed, Jurgen played an even bigger role than Cedric in the whole initiative, because he was actually the guy who automated lots of our things. He's left us since then too, so I hope everything's going well in your new organization. So thanks for your help, Jurgen.
With pleasure. Everything's going well, but with a lot of...
you need some coaching?
Yeah, always.
Any other requirements for documentation?
So wait. So no other requirements onto your organization with regards to other type of data science release maps?
Not really, no.
No.
Our users are all internal users, so they're the 2,500 people that are inside our organization that use Theseos for their daily work. Theseos is also the backend to my pension. By the way, any Belgian here, make sure to go to my pension. You can see when the first date that you might be able to retire is. So Theseos serves as the backend to that. But for our developments in Theseos, other than that, there's not much documentation.
Yeah, so there is an effort to turn testing more towards a running specification and use specification by example mapping, so that analysis documents can be reduced in size, just having a title of a functionality, and then that you invest time with the team investigating, what is this title, what do you mean, and that you get really specifications that then end into tests.
Yeah. Now, as an organization, we like big projects and upfront analysis. So that has not changed yet. But now that it's easy to do incremental changes, the assumption is that it will start to happen. And so indeed, that's where this specification by example effort is coming in. But we're still experimenting with that.
Yeah. Cedric, can you unmute yourself and instead of the chat, just explain?
Yeah, sorry, I just didn't want to interrupt, but a lot of questions regarding documentations. And I think it was interesting to go further without disturbing the others. The main point is, you are guys working Agile in quite an advanced way, whatever happens, whatever problems, but it goes fine. And product owners are daily working with business, closely with them, to define what will be done in these 15 teams. And everything is defined as added value business requirement. So there is no much need of a documentation, as everything is known before being developed.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of interaction between the IT teams and the business teams. Exactly. That's still the case. and more so in the last bubble, by the way, I've observed.
Okay, more questions? No? Then
I still have one. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. You were talking that you've implemented the whole thing while there was a major release coming. So I assume that when you started, you had features that were going to be implemented. How much did the effort on implementing the continuous delivery impact the feature set? Did you have to switch off features and say, well, due to the energy we're putting into continuous delivery, we can't develop that other thing? Did that happen, or was it just everybody crunching in some extra hours and you got it all done?
The short answer is no, there was no impact. There's like when you have 150 people working on something for a few months, there's so much measurement uncertainty and so many little things that happen all the time that our effort, so 1 day per week for 20 people, didn't really stand out. So we didn't really feel that lack of man days in our production.
Now, on the other hand, the fact that the tests kept being unstable, well, is the reason that teams didn't invest a lot of time in improving these tests.
So
that's true. But that effort we start.
You could have spent another 300 man days on it. It's still cheaper than keeping the major ones.
Yeah. Because this whole initiative took us 300 man days ish, like 25 days from Thierry. The rest was just done by us. And actually, this effort to improve our tests, it's something that's expensive and that's taking time. But that's happening now kind of automatically, since that the pipeline is so visible and the result is so visible, and it's so clear to us how important it is to have quick feedback and control over our quality. So that is happening now, since the last 6 months or so, is happening gradually. So did it impact our ability to produce new features? Not visibly.
Okay, that's good to know. Because that's the problem with smaller teams, that the effort you're putting in continuous delivery gets visible, and then you have managers that start asking, well, where is that feature? And then you have to explain why that feature is being delayed a bit. So that's
so in our case, we got it done before those questions came, really.
Yeah, and then again, Tom, in your case, you have one product owner, 6 teams, or 16 teams. So there are 16 teams working on it. If you work in a situation where you have every team has their own team owner, I wouldn't call it product owner in that sense, then it's very more visible. So this is the fallacy of the low numbers. So the more you go into nitty-gritty details, the more you see variance popping up. The bigger the hole you look at, the less variance you have. Meaning if you, for example, would push things to a server and you look at a server on the load it gets, like let's say a server that is doing popular concert tickets. And you look at the load 1 hour versus 1 hour on each several separate server, then you will see huge variances between those servers, but also between the different hours, time frames, when it's being announced or something like that. If you now say, I don't look at each server separately and not at 1 hour, I take a full day and I look at the full farm, and then I just compare full day, full farm, day after day, then you will see the variance of this thing will be a hell of a lot lower. So, and this explains as well, if you have a bigger bunch of people and you take away some effort from that, then the variance, so the change in delivery for this whole piece of things will not be that much affected. If it's a single team in that thing, then you will see huge variation.
Yeah. And from the onset, we stressed the fact that, hey, people, this is going to take time. So we're going to do 1 day of workshops from September until December. And people knew that when they signed up. So they talked about it with their team and their line manager or whatever. But our capability to deliver at that time as a whole was not visibly impacted.
Now, obviously, implementing continuous integration and continuous delivery after the fact has far more impact than when you start to do this right from the start. Because if you do it right from the start, well, it's just doing your day-to-day job.
Yeah.
Is that good enough, Wouter?
That's a perfect answer. That was what I was looking for. Thank you.
Cool. Then we have an elaboration on documentation. The documentation that was looked for was regulations, like
legal stuff,
health audits.
Do you have legal stuff?
Obviously. Well, because we're a government agency, what we do is apply the law. So all our work is legal work. I suppose there are audits that happen from Rekenhof and stuff like that.
Do you ever have to prove, like, the system does this?
No.
And this is the proof?
No.
So Because, well, you could achieve that with running specifications.
Yeah.
If your tests are running specifications, well, you have this legal documentation for free.
Yeah. But no, in our case, that's not the case. Again, because in theory, all our users are experts in the matter anyway. So if our system makes a mistake, then they surely will see it. So yeah, other than that, there's no legal documentation.
Okay, this was apparently satisfying enough as an answer. Cool. Any more questions to our two experts here? Nothing coming up. So
I have a question. I'm just not that quick at typing.
But now we can hear you better. So if you talk slowly, then we can hear you.
Is it better? Yeah. I was just wondering, when you are going to go for continuous integration, do you completely build on your internal people, or are you wondering about hiring external experts for that?
I think we'll keep the same expert we have.
Yeah.
And let the teams do the work, because it's their work. Huh?
Yeah.
I think it's one of the success factors that No More Majors actually worked, is that we did it ourselves. And like when we have these sessions, all the knowledge is around the table. So you can, all the historic knowledge, the functional knowledge, the technical knowledge is right there at the table, or maybe like a chat message away. So you can get information so quickly and you make decisions so quickly. I found that works a lot better than hiring somebody to put them in a corner for 2 months and let them solve the problem.
So yeah, so continuous integration and continuous delivery by extension is really about technological practices, some organizational changes, but it's really about software engineering practices. So hiring somebody to do that will not help you. You need to learn it. You need to hire somebody that will learn you all those engineering practices. And this is what the teams need to adopt it. So it's about learning how to do incremental software development, working in small increments, learning about test-driven development, about acceptance test-driven development, about database migrations. Well, everything that helps into incrementally deliver your functionality and having always this application always working, always running, always being able to just say, well, this one looks to be good, we will just pop it into production. Without taking any risks, without having lots of stress, without creating burnout, well, lots of good stuff. But it requires lots of learning. And it helps to have someone inside the team that actually show you how to do it, because it's really that most of the people just don't know how to start it, and once you show them, they're like, oh, it's that easy. Yeah, it's that easy. But well, it requires some practice, but well, you get better at it.
Yeah, making the change itself is not so hard, but wanting to make the change is where all the work goes, and why you need so much communication and aligning on what's the purpose and why we're doing this.
Okay, cool. We're going to close down the session, so to give Tom and Thierry also some relaxing time. So Tom was a bit nervous. He's less public speaking than Thierry is, most probably. So let's give him some time to relax, have a beer, and then go to bed. If there are
already had his beer.
So if you have more questions, please feel free to tweet them on #TDPO, so which is in the chat window, and or co-learning BE, and then we'll make sure that we can follow up on those later on.